Here we have a little beach house in Lincoln City. It's called A Point of View, 2305 Southwest Bard Loop. Stayed here several times. Dad stayed here with us 4 or 5 times. Janice and I have been here a few times. Chris is here. That's his car you see immediately in front of us. It's May 8th, 2007. And the purpose of this trip was to talk to Dad and get his thoughts and his growing up thoughts on a DVD that I could give to the family. Steve's participating with me on this, so here is the beginning of it. We're going to next have Dad sitting with us and talking about his experiences. Here's the back of the property in Lincoln City. You can see, even though it's an overcast day, I'm panning across, you can see just what a tremendous view you have from here. It's just beautiful. I wish the sun was out right now, it'd be even better. But this is the setting for our time with Dad, and can continue to just pan across to where the house is here. There's a deck below, and then this deck over here, that's the slider. Well, sure it has. So we'll just practice before we start recording then.
Okay.
So going back as far as you can remember growing up, Kirksville, right? In the house that you were born in?
No.
Do you remember? No?
No.
Do you remember growing up with Janet and any?
Not.
I mean, how much older than Janet are you?
Yeah, I have flashes of memory going back maybe into the early 1930s.
Do you?
1934, when I was in the first grade, is probably the first year that I knew what year it was. And that's when I was in the first grade. And at that time, my mother and father had just gotten a divorce, which impacted quite a bit on our lives.
Yeah, so a divorce then, was that more rare than it is now?
It was rare. I was the only kid at school that had divorced parents.
So did you feel different? I mean, did the kids treat you any different at school? Or?
Yes, somewhat.
Yeah.
Somewhat. The parents, they'd feel sorry for me. And the teachers, I think, somewhat. You know how that is.
Yeah. So were you a normal kid, and you used that to your advantage at all?
Yeah. I was. I what?
Did you use that to your advantage?
Not at that time.
No. Okay. So after your parents got divorced, how long before you had a stepdad? Was it a while?
Quite a while.
Oh, it was. Okay.
Quite a while. We lived for about almost 6 years in this cottage, is what they called it. It was a house that had 3 rooms, no hot water, no inside plumbing to speak of. We had a faucet that came into the kitchen. On our porch, we had an ice box. That was the kind of where you got ice and put in it, and that's how you kept your milk and stuff. We used a wash tub to take a bath in. And Janet and I both used the wash tub to have a bath, usually about once a week.
And they just poured the water into the tub?
Yeah, they would heat a tea kettle full of hot water and pour it in, and then add cold water until you were able to get in it and take a bath.
And you remember those baths? Now, you did it individually or together?
Generally individually.
And that was in Missouri at the same house?
In Kansas City.
Oh, Kansas City.
Yeah, it was on the edge of Kansas City. It was outside the city limits. The school I went to was just inside the city limits.
So was the school,
was it about 6 blocks away?
Oh, so it wasn't 14 miles each way, uphill in the snow, barefoot?
It was a long ways in the winter when you're in the first grade or second grade.
Well, especially the Midwest winters, right?
Yes, it was pretty, but you didn't think anything about it. It was just part of life.
Yeah.
You didn't, it was just the way people lived and the way you lived, and there wasn't any great feel. You had no way of looking into the future and seeing how things would get then. And
Sure.
The way we were living is not all that different from the way people had lived 25, 30, 40, 50 years prior to that time. And there was a great difference in those days between the rural areas and the city. You go into the city and people had what we would consider more modern facilities. They had telephones. We never had a telephone. We did have electricity. We had electricity. We had a light hanging down from the ceiling. And later on, probably when I was in about the third or fourth grade, we bought a radio. And the other thing we would use electricity for was electric fans, because it'd be pretty hot, you know.
Yeah. So when you had the radio, maybe one local station?
No, because we got the Kansas City station.
Oh, okay.
And but basically we got one station.
Yeah.
WDAF, I remember.
It's funny how you remember
Yeah,
that.
I used to listen to the baseball games. Kansas City Blues, and that was a AAA team.
Wow. For the Cincinnati Reds or for
No,
the Cardinals?
No, as I remember in the American Association then, because I used to listen, I don't remember them all. I know there was the Toledo.
Mud Hens.
No, I don't think it was
No?
Mud Hens. Toledo had a team, and there weren't any teams in the National Leagues west of St. Louis.
So you
St.
remember
Louis
listening?
had two teams.
You remember listening to the ball games, and then through your grade school. Did you go to the same grade school?
I went to the same grade school through the 5th grade, and Benjamin Harrison. I took Steve by there. I don't know if you.
No, I didn't see your grade school.
It's not a grade school anymore. I think it was a Lutheran school when Steve and I went by there, and it was a big school. And like I say, it was 6 blocks away. Schools were handled differently then too. Most of our teachers were they were all women teachers. We never even could conceive of a male being a teacher. Certainly not in grade school. And you had the same teacher in the same classroom all day.
Right.
And it was steady school. You had recess once in the morning, once in the afternoon. You had an hour for lunch. Very few people ate in the cafeteria. If you did eat in the cafeteria, they had the same menu every day.
Oh, jeez.
But no, very few. People would do it on occasion, you know. But I'd say maybe once or twice a year I'd have a hot lunch. It cost 15 cents. We did get milk, and I think that cost, as I recall, 3 cents. And so it came in little glass bottles
Wow.
those days. And
Yeah.
so we all went, for lunch, you all went into the gymnasium, and they had a bench all along the wall, and you all sat there and had your lunch. And lunch would usually be, for me, I wasn't all that different on the other kids. I'd have a fried egg sandwich very often.
Was that the hot lunch at the school, or that's
no,
lunch
that's the
that
cold lunch that you
Mom
brought.
made you?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, Mom or Granny made it. And our peanut butter and jam sandwich, cookie, you homemade cookie, and then I have the milk, you know. And after 20 minutes or so of lunch, we'd throw away the sacks or the garbage. Then we'd go out and we could play out in the schoolyards.
Now, did you wear there weren't school uniforms or anything? You just
No uniforms.
You
And
just-
none of the kids in this area Yeah, universally a poor neighborhood where we lived, and there wasn't, to my knowledge, any people very high up on the economic schedule. A lot of the men that were living in that area, they worked at the steel mill, which was maybe 5 miles to the west of us in Kansas City itself. There was a big steel mill there, and it was working most of the time, even during the Depression. And so it was a laboring type of neighborhood.
So growing up with Aunt Janet, our Aunt Janet, do you remember much interaction between the two of you?
Well, at home there was.
Yeah.
Yes.
How would you say were you guys like normal brother and sister?
Well, you got to remember the times were a little different. The boys played with the boys, and the girls played with the girls.
Right.
And we lived in there was this oil road that came up the hill, made a big circle, and came back down and onto Wilson Road, it was called. It was the old Highway 24. And there was about, I'd say 30 houses on that big hill and among the trees, and there would be dirt paths between the houses, and then you had the oil roads going up, and not everybody had cars. I'd say most of the people that lived there didn't own automobiles.
Oh.
And but there were a bunch of cars, but nothing like there would have been later. And so the kids that lived in that neighborhood all played together in packs, you might say, you know. And the girls played with the girls, the boys played with the boys. There wasn't much interaction in that.
So Janet had her friends, and you had your friends, and,
yes.
And never the two shall meet, kind of.
Well, it wasn't quite that, but
No.
You know, we didn't, you know, we played a lot of softball, for instance, and we didn't want to, you know, the girls didn't play with us on it. The girls played with dolls, and, you know.
As they should, right there.
As they should, I suppose. So
You said
have that on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you said that you went to that grade school through 5th grade,
Yes.
but grade school was 1 through 6, right? So
well,
you went to
it was
6th
a little
grade.
different in Kansas City. It was actually 1 through 7 in Kansas City.
So you actually had 6th and 7th grade then at a different grade school.
As it turned out.
And
Not
and where
really.
was that?
No, you're jumping ahead a little bit there.
Okay.
Because I went through the 5th grade there, and then I don't know the reason at all, but we wound up moving to Kirksville, where we lived with Aunt Pearl. That was my grandmother's older sister.
I remember you talking about Aunt Pearl.
And Aunt Pearl, she always really treated me well, and she liked Janet. And then Jane, who you met, was Aunt Pearl's adopted daughter.
Oh, okay.
And Jane lived there too. And so I went to the 6th grade in Kirksville, in the Washington School, which when we drove by there, it hadn't been a school a long time now. But then we went back to Kansas City, and I lived with Granny and Caw-Caw there.
Now, Caw-Caw?
Caw-Caw was my grandfather. I call him Caw-Caw as a baby name, like Bumpa was for me.
Oh, okay.
And so that's
It's
what
original.
I called him, and Granny. And she was Granny because her mother was still alive, and her mother was Grandma. That was Grandma Henry.
Okay.
She lived in Kirksville. And Aunt Pearl was Granny's sister, older sister, actually. And so anyway, we went to the 6th grade. Then we moved back to Kansas City, and I was in the 7th grade then. Still at the same school at Benjamin Harrison. And this was like in 1942, and the war had started, and you know, we was interested in girls, and then had the dances a little bit, and then every dance night ended with Sentimental Journey, the Glenn Miller.
Hey, that's still a good song. I still like that. I like that
know
song.
I know it was. And so And then, for whatever reason, and I'm never sure what the reason was, we moved back to Kirksville.
So you were only there a year the second time?
Yeah. And this was in World War II. Had started in the meantime. I was actually at Kirksville when it started. And I was in the 7th grade, and I'm not sure how this all worked now. I've forgotten. But I think I had moved back to Kansas City before the end of the year, is what happened. Then the 8th grade I took in Kirksville, in junior high school. And mother got remarried in that year. She had gotten, the divorce had happened in 1934, and I think she married Jock in 1941. My stepdad is.
So your middle years were without a stepdad?
Without it, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then when I was remember in the 8th grade, and then after she married Jock, he worked for the CAA, which today is the FAA. It was Civil Aeronautics Administration, and he's a radio operator. He'd been a radio operator in the Navy. He had been a first-class petty officer, which was a big rank for as young as he was. He was a sharp guy. And he got out of the Navy in 1940, 2 weeks before everybody that was in the regular Navy and Army got frozen. Prior to World War II, they all got frozen. They couldn't get discharged after that. But he got out and he went to work for the government then as CAA. And smart guy, and he went a long ways. And every time he got transferred, he got promoted, and so he got transferred to Chanute, Kansas, which was a bigger airport than the one at Kirksville. And so I went to the 9th grade in Chanute, Kansas. Had a paper route there. I liked Chanute. Then he got promoted and wound up in Denver Airport. So we lived in Denver for a year. We actually lived in Wheat Ridge, was a couple miles out to the west of Denver proper at that time. I think it's part of Denver now. And I went to school in Wheat Ridge my sophomore year, which I really liked Wheat Ridge. And Janet, though, was not living with us there. She was living with Granny and Caco, and she'd go to school in Kansas City.
Did you ever live with Janet again after that then?
Yes.
Oh, you did. So it was just a short period of time.
Back and forth. There would be times when we were together, times when we weren't together.
Okay.
All during this period.
I gotcha. Okay.
Depending on what relative got stuck with me.
And is that
they all wanted Janet, none of them wanted me, but that's another
why
story.
wouldn't they? Yeah, I know. We'll have to touch on why they didn't want you.
Well, they all liked Janet. Everybody liked Janet. Not everybody liked me. That's a pain in the ass, I think. But anyway.
Well, good. That's spirit, you know.
Yeah, then I went back and lived with Granny and Caco. In the meantime, they had moved to a different part of Kansas City, and in the central part of the city. And I went my junior year of high school. Jock, during that time, was in Fairbanks, Alaska. He had gone up there, and the war is still on now. It's still 1944, and then so I went back junior year. Then the war ended that summer, just finishing my junior year, and Jock would by that time and moved way up, and now then he's at the San Francisco airport. And so we lived in and found a place. They found a place in Millbrae, California, and this is a house that would fit modern standards. You know, and California in those days was way ahead of the rest of the country. You know, and so that the lifestyle in California in 1946. Was kind of the beginning of the post-war lifestyle that we all lived with. And so I went to I went out, and Janet and I, we lived in Millbrae then, and I went to school in Burlingame. Millbrae wasn't a big enough town to have its own high school. A few years later, it had a population of 50,000, but at that time the population was probably around 3,500 or 4,000. But there was a huge growth in California along the peninsula. Millbrae's on the peninsula, close to Burlingame. I went to high school in Burlingame, as did Janet, my senior year. And during that year, I grew, and, you know, I was there about a year, and I worked part-time. I worked at the movie theater as an usher for a while. You got awful sick of some of those crappy movies.
Not the productions they are
But
now.
there was a fringe benefit. I was the usher there, and I could let my buddies and the good-looking girls sit in the lounge section and not have to pay extra, you know, that sort of thing. But and then I worked as pin setter at the bowling alley, and I had done that earlier when I'd lived in Kansas City.
At what age did you do it earlier?
You know, I'm not sure how I started. I think I started when I was about 14.
Oh, they let you start that early.
Yeah, that's no place for 14-year-old kids. But you either learn and survive in a couple of weeks, or you don't. But it was hard work, and but it was money. You could make pretty decent money for a kid doing that.
And say decent
And
money.
then I had a paper route in Chanute for the first time. That's where I had a paper route. I had the Kansas City Star and Times, and Kansas City Star was the evening paper, and the Times was the morning paper. So I carried in the morning, and then I carried after school too. I think I made like $4 a week in a good week.
Wow,
And
good money back then.
Well, not really good, I think, but we had more spending money than other kids in the 9th grade. And
Sure.
on Saturdays, those of us that carried papers, we had to go collect our own routes, you know.
Oh, I
We had a
remember.
little punch ticket.
Yeah.
And they paid 25 cents a week. I still remember that. And you'd collect the money, and then you got to keep a certain percentage of what you collected. And then we'd all congregate at the local pool hall and spend our week's wages shooting pool, drinking pop, and eating candy bars, you know.
Hey, you gotta have fun sometime.
Yeah, that
At least you
was
were
it.
funding your fun experience
Yeah,
there.
but unfortunately, it set the pattern for the rest of my life, you know. But anyway, it's a good experience, and you're healthy. I mean, you really get physically, I think, healthy doing that kind of work
Oh,
with pin setters. And the other thing I'd learned how to do was caddy. And I learned how to do that. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. After my father and mother divorced, we didn't hear anything from him for about 5 years. And then he got in contact with her and wanted me to come down to Mountain Grove, Missouri, where he lived. He's established a practice. He was an osteopath. During the 30s and 40s, he never could get really started. He had, I think, probably a drinking problem, to say the least. And but apparently he matured and eventually had a pretty decent medical practice in Mountain Grove. So I went there that one year, and I must have been 12. I'm not sure whether I was 11 or 12, but it was probably about 1940, so I think it was 12. And I spent 2.5 months there during the summer. And I got to know the kids down there. You know, that's in South Missouri, and used to do the same things that they did in other areas where kids all grouped together, and we'd leave home in the morning, go out into the country, and be back for supper, you know, that sort of thing. In Mountain Grove, they had a little interesting twist to that. We'd go down the dry creek beds in August, turning over rocks, looking for water moccasins and kill them.
Just for fun.
Yeah, for fun. Fun, you know.
And so how long were you in, what was it called again?
Mountain Grove.
Mountain Grove.
Just the summer, and then I went back the following summer, and then I went back the summer I was 16 for a month, you know.
So how did you get along with your father when you would visit?
Distant.
Yeah.
You know, I never felt comfortable with him.
Hmm.
He never felt comfortable with me, I don't think. And his wife, who had straightened him up, I think we don't know how many wives he had. This was his third or fourth. Ted was his mother. I mean, Ted's mother
Ted was his mother.
Yeah, Ted was
His son from another woman.
his son's from his wife.
Okay.
Anyway, but she treated me well, you know. But they traveled a lot and they were busy a lot, and I was mostly playing in the neighborhood with the kids. And you know, I was 16, running around, going down to Willow Springs because there was a tavern down there, a beer garden that we could get into when we were 16. That was the way it was in those days. There was a couple of taverns outside of Kansas City, outside the city limits, that catered primarily to high school kids, if you can believe that.
I can believe it.
Yes.
You know, they didn't have the
They didn't have-
liquor inspectors as prevalent then.
No, they didn't. They didn't, and it was interesting. You know, we could. You know, we lived in Kansas City, Missouri, and then the Kansas City, Kansas was across the Kaw River there. You know, and in Missouri, we couldn't. If you're 16, let's say, you couldn't go in a pool hall. You know, but in Kansas, you could go into a pool hall. Also, in Kansas was a dry state, which meant they didn't. Everybody bought beer. They didn't, but it was all bootleg. You know, it wasn't bootleg, but I mean, it was against the law to sell it, but everybody sold it. You know, if pool halls sold it, so we could go over there and drink beer, and because if they don't have any rules, then about if it's illegal, then they'll sell it to kids.
Sure.
It's
It's illegal to everybody, whether you're 8 or 80.
So we'd go over there and drink beer, and not get wild or anything, but we'd have a little beer and play pool over there. Take a streetcar over there. But, so anyway, there was a lot of things. And the last year I was in Kansas City, I got a job at Hall Brothers. This was during World War II. This was in 1944 when I started working there. And Hall Brothers makes Hallmark greeting cards.
Oh.
So I worked in the Hallmark greeting card factory, and they had a problem during those war years because they were not what they called an essential industry. So that they had to, they operated their greeting card business by working late afternoons and Saturdays, and they hired high school students and women to do most of the work. They had a few 4F guys out on the loading dock, you know, did the heavy work. And I used to buy whiskey from one of them, but anyway, so we worked, it was one of the greatest jobs. They had benefits way ahead of their time. They had the coffee break time, and when they brought around carts with pop and candy bars and everything free on it. And they just really treated their help great. And but it was a lot of work there.
How long did you do that?
I did that until we moved to California, and then of course, I had to quit.
Well,
So
yeah.
it was about 11 months that I worked for Hallmark. Maybe not quite that long. But,
You could have been president of the company.
well, I could have been fired within a week after I quit. Who knows?
Yeah. So when you
my
went,
my job there was I worked in the boxing department. So they had all these women, and they sat at these counters, and what they did is they took the packages, the greeting cards, you know, and put them in boxes to ship to the stores, you know, little boxes, and they got paid by piecework. So they didn't want to run out of boxes. They get really excited if they ran out of boxes. So you had to make sure they had boxes all the time, because they get paid piecework. They didn't want to have to stand there without any
and not
boxes.
make any money, yeah.
You know, some of those women got pretty vicious if they ran out. And then after they'd have a cart full of them, I'd push it down. There were about one other guy that worked in that department, one other kid. And it was about a block-long building, and we'd take it clear down to the other end, which was the shipping department. That's where they had most of the kids working, was in the shipping department. But it was a good job, and so then we moved to California.
So what brought on the move to California?
Jock came back from Fairbanks, Alaska, and was stationed at the San Francisco airport, which at that time was tore up as South City, South San Francisco.
And so you guys lived where in California?
Millbrae.
Millbrae.
When you land an airplane, if you're in an airplane that's landing, I should say, at San Francisco airport, generally speaking, the runway they land on, just about 20 feet off the ground, I can look over and see the house that we lived in.
Wow.
It's still there, and of course it's a nice neighborhood. Those houses were built about the first big housing project in California built after World War II. And it was finished in 1946. We were the first ones to live in the house.
Oh, neat.
So they could have bought it. They didn't. That if they had, they could have made a lot of money on those houses then. I think they could have bought it for $6,000.
Oh, yeah.
Those days, because that was a lot more money then.
Sure. So you lived there, and he went to work for the CAA, and I mean, he was transferred.
Yeah, he was. He'd been in Fairbanks, and so he came.
So
down.
you needed to make new friends, and
yeah, and it was different. I went to Burlingame High School, and I liked it. I was making good money because I started setting pins again. So I ran. Burlingame was a very wealthy school. I mean, in terms of the Hillsborough, which was the wealthiest town in California at that time, and it was where the rich from San Francisco lived.
Could we talk about your pin setter
and
story before we get past it?
Oh well, yeah.
You were telling a story last night about
when we lived in San Francisco, the Tan Fran Navy base was where the Tan Fran racetrack had been there before the war, and later after the war was too. And they had a Navy base there, and the Navy base had a bowling alley, and so me and a friend of mine, we went up to there and see if we could get a job as a pin setter, and they hired us just like that. The chief petty officer did. So we sat after school and weekends. We set pins there at this Navy, and it was a hell of a good deal because the Navy guys got to bowl free. So the way they tip us is they just write a couple of extra lines on their score sheet. And the old chief went right along with it. That's how we got our tips. Well, it didn't cost any money, so we really got good tips there. But it was just one night we were sitting there, and this guy was drunk. And I had been double balled before. By that I mean somebody picking up a ball, usually some dippy woman, pick up a ball and throw it while you're still there. But you'd hear it hit the alley.
So then you could get out of the way.
You just jump back out of the way, and you'd have a few pins flying around you, but usually didn't get hurt. Well, this guy, I didn't hear it. And he threw it hard. It must have just laid it down on the alley, and I had to look up just before it hit the pins. So I jumped back real quick, and I had pins flying all around me, but the ball hit me on the leg. If it had hit the bone, it would have broke it. It would hit me in the calf of the leg. And when you're doing that kind of repetitious work, you get mad anyway. It just goes with the territory. And I was so mad. I was furious. And I picked up a pin, and I'm hobbling with this pin up to the front there along the wall to get at this guy. And of course, the old chief gets up and stops me right there, prevents me from, being indicted for manslaughter.
Creating a felony,
yeah.
He stopped you from committing a felony.
And then he kicked the guy out. But that's the only time I was ever really hit by a ball in all the years.
Did you talk? Now you said something about you'd get even by spitting in the ball holes or something, in the finger holes, or spitting in the finger holes of bowlers. Did you ever do that?
Do what?
Spit in the ball?
Spit in it?
Yeah, I thought I remembered you saying
Oh, no, I
that.
never
Okay.
did.
Okay, so
I didn't.
that
I,
was in,
I was always short of moisture back there.
yeah, you weren't going to give any of that.
Spit. I drank beer back there, you know. But, you know, you could always drink beer. You work it right out though when you were doing that kind
Oh
of
yeah.
work.
So that was in California.
That was in Burlingame.
Yeah.
Where I got hit was up to Tanfran.
Now,
So
how
I
long-
set pins there, and I also set at the Burlingame Bowl.
So you
I
did.
mostly set the Burlingame Bowl after I was discharged the first time out of the Army, which another period of my life.
So you did the pin setting when you first got there for a while.
No, I didn't. I set at Tanfran,
Right.
and that was in 1946 when I did that. The war was over, just over. And then when I was finished my senior year, I joined the Army right out of high school.
And you weren't 18, right?
No, I was 17.
And so how did you get in the Army when you weren't 18?
Mother signed
Oh,
the
okay.
papers. She wouldn't sign it until I graduated. That was the whole deal.
Did you want to enlist before you graduated?
Yeah, I probably would have.
Yeah.
You know, times are different. You know,
Yeah.
You get the war fervor and all, particularly when you're that age.
Sure.
But ordinarily, the Army wouldn't. There were a lot of kids that got in the Army when they were 16 in those years. But usually, you had to be 17 to get in and have a birth certificate.
And so you went in.
But I turned 17 in August, and this was in June, so I had my 18th birthday while in the middle of basic training.
And basic training was 9 weeks back then, or
8 weeks back
8 weeks.
then, yeah. And but you didn't go directly in the Army into basic like you later did. You'd go to a reception center. And we went to Camp Beale, California. That was before the Air Force was a separate unit. And so I went in, we went there, all the enlistees, and still had our civilian clothes on. And they worked us, put us on KP mostly. And they had these big, huge mess halls there. In the middle of summer in Sacramento Valley.
Ooh.
And hot and everything. But anyway, we did that. I was there. You just had to wait every day. You'd be in formation. They call out the names of the ones who were being shipped. And most of the guys get shipped. And I had joined to go into to become a medic. But they didn't have a separate deal. If you were going into medic, you went to infantry school for basic training, which is what I did. But almost all of them came up to Fort Lewis. I'd never been in the state of Washington. But for some crazy reason, they sent 8 of us to Camp Polk, Louisiana. And that's where I went for basic training, Camp Polk.
Now,
It's Fort Polk now.
And this was in late summer?
This was in 1946, early summer.
Early summer. And how was the weather there? It's pretty humid, wasn't it?
Humid, hot, but I'd grown up in Missouri. I'd been doing, work like setting pins in the summer and all. So I did, but most of the kids that day, most of them were farm kids or came from the lower stations in life, so to speak.
So the physical thing didn't
So
bother.
most of the kids that were in basic training in those days were physically able to do it. You didn't have many city boys that went into the Army then, what we called city boys. but I'd had a more varied adolescence than most of them had. I'd say most of the kids in basic training were Southerners. Came from Mississippi, came from the hard scrabble farms in Mississippi and Alabama. A lot from Texas in there. And then Southern California, they had quite a few Mexicans. And they had a bunch of Japanese, Hawaiians, Japanese ancestry and Hawaiian that also would wind up in Fort Polk for the basic. We had whole bunch of them, and they were really nice guys. We were really kind of fun because when we got up in the basic, you can't go to the PX or anything the first 5 or 6 weeks, and then you can go to the beer garden at night or in the evening. And it was kids from Hawaii, the Japanese American, most of them, and Hawaiian. They would buy a couple of cases of beer, and they had a beer garden at the PX, and they'd put the beer right there, and then they'd all sit and they'd drink beer and sing Hawaiian songs. And of course, anybody that was in the company was welcome to join them,
If you knew how to sing it, yeah.
You didn't have to know how to
You
sing.
just sing it anyway.
It didn't make any difference.
Especially after a few beers in the beer garden.
But it was just one of the more enjoyable parts of basic, to say the least. There wasn't a lot of enjoyable parts.
No, there wasn't when I went in either.
But it was, I was one of the more famous recruits. They didn't call us recruits then, because I was noted as the one that shot the hole in the bus.
Now that right there doesn't sound like a very good thing.
not anything you really want to have happen.
Be known for.
But it was really crazy the way it all happened. It never should have happened. And but I had done nothing wrong. And what happened is we were out on the range firing the M1. They're pretty powerful weapons. And a 30 caliber, 8 bullets in the magazine, and it comes in a clip. And I don't have to go into all that, but it had a gas chamber in it, a very powerful gun. It was a World War II weapon. And the first day on the range, and our officers were mostly combat veterans from the European War waiting to get their discharge. And this was in '46, and the war's only been over 10 months. And 9 months, and so they were waiting their discharge so they'd get stuck as working on this company. The non-commissioned officers were mostly veterans from the war too. They weren't necessarily combat veterans. Some were, some weren't. But they hadn't been cadre men as such. So this is the first time through for them too. So they go out in the range, and I'm firing, and I have a malfunction. The rifle malfunctioned. It wouldn't fire anymore. So they did tap you on the shoulder, you go back. And I remember looking down that barrel, and I couldn't see through it. And I said, boy, when you fire them, they really get dirty. They stupid. And I carried that rifle all day with the chamber open. And usually a bullet goes in the chamber, it'll slide right out, But what had happened is it had been a bullet that had a flaw in it, and it had exploded in the chamber and had stuck in the chamber. So, but I carry that rifle around now. Part of the time you're firing, part of the time you're back raising the targets up and down and keeping scores, and then at the end of the day you all police. By that you will pick up all the trash and the bullets, the shells and everything. Did the whole thing, and then got on the bus, sat down on the bus, got my rifle in front of me like this, and I noticed the lock, that my chamber's still open. So I unlocked it, closed the chamber, pulled the trigger, and it went off.
Straight up?
Like that. And right above my head, there's a bullet hole in the bus.
Oh.
And of course, it just shook everybody up because all the cadremen and all were not on the bus. And here they had this whole busload of Army guys, recruits, and they hear an M1 go off in the bus, and they get excited, real excited.
They came running in.
Real excited. They came in, I don't know how he knew it was me, but he came right over to me and grabbed my rifle and took it away from me and went off. And so we all went back, and I figured, Christ, I'm going to get court-martialed. You know, so I don't know what I'd done wrong, but I know I had to do that something.
Yeah, the fact that it did that, that's a Craig thing anyway.
Well, anyway, they called me, and the other thing that scared the shit out of me, you know, when you're in basic, you working with these guys, living with them, and you're always ragging each other.
Oh, yeah.
You're always on everybody's ass, and they're on yours, and the whole bit. I'm sitting out there on the front steps, waiting for them to come and get me, and all the guys in my squad were being nice to me, sitting there with me. And they knew that I was gone too. And finally I saw the orderly from the first sergeant's office come walking across towards the barracks. And he's coming to get me, so I went back to him. So I explained what happened, and they, you know, the guy, the captain, he'd been in combat and the whole bit, and he said, well, he's just really nice. He said, well, you know, sometimes during the lapses in the combat, we actually had more injuries from firearms and all. But I hadn't really done anything wrong.
Right.
They had screwed up, because what they're supposed to do before they load you on the buses is
just make sure that
they get you all out there and have you go through the end, hold your rifles up and clear the weapons. And they hadn't done it. Well, the first time through for those guys and the whole bit. But I hadn't done anything wrong.
But of course it gave you a nice name.
Well, it worked in my advantage, because they wanted to know who the cadreman was that had cleared me off the firing line. You know.
Right.
He was the guy that fucked up, because you're supposed to goose the chamber with your little finger before you clear anybody off. He obviously hadn't done that. He had just cleared me off the line. And it was this big guy from another platoon. And I figured I didn't want that big son of a bitch in the stockade with me. So I told him I didn't remember who it was. I said, well, you know, and I said, well, it's some guy from another platoon. I don't remember who it was. Well, when you're 17, you get away with that.
Sure.
Of course I knew who it was. But I said, I didn't know who it was, and so I wouldn't tell them who it was. And they tried to get it from me, but you know, they weren't really trying that hard.
Yeah.
Looking back on it.
Yeah, they were going to let you do that.
They had to do that to satisfy the powers that be. Well, anyway, after I finished basic training, one of the sergeant in charge of me, he said, you know, we thought that you would turn it in, who it was, you know, that you'd squeal on him or whatever. And he says, you really did the right thing by not doing it. He said, your life would have been hell if you had it. And the kicker was, I wound up being selected as one of the top graduates of that basic
company
and going to NCO school from there. Now, I know I wasn't one of the top 10.
But you were.
But I was, yeah. So I went to NCO school there.
That's how you. Well, that's a good
Didn't
story.
hurt. I did make rank early, and
Sure.
every little bit helps. But well,
You want to take a break?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll talk more about your Army experiences. Move into
Yeah.
how you met Mom
that's
and
enough.
other things.
That's just interesting.
Okay, so we're going to start with after basic training now,
Okay.
where you got transferred and.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay, go ahead.
It's on. Huh?
It's on. It's rolling.
It's
You're the
rolling.
star again.
Well, in the last week, when we were out in the field in basic training, I had broke my glasses. I had Army glasses, gold rimmed glasses that they had, and I broke them out in the field. And so, to get new glasses, they'd send you down to the hospital. You'd go on sick. You'd go on the sick call, and then you would they'd send you in a bus because it was 8 or 9 miles away. And so I went to the hospital to get the glasses, and they have you're there all day because the bus comes in the morning, leaves in the afternoon. Everybody does their things, and then the ones that are not staying will go back. And so I was wandering around the hospital and dressed in these dirty fatigues and all that, and I saw these guys dressed these pretty white uniforms, and I ate there, and the food was so much better than what the food was that we got. So, I'm motivated by that.
You made a career decision.
I
didn't
made
you?
a career decision. I was making a career decision. I didn't realize it. So when we got back from the field, I went to the first sergeant office and said, I want to be a medic. Oh, okay. He wrote it down, and I thought, that's too easy. That's too easy. That doesn't sound like, wasn't a real competitive thing. And so he took my name, I guess. But in the meantime, I went to that leadership school, which was 6 weeks, which was a great school. It was really military, really spit and polish. But we ate family style. It was really kind of a good deal. Learned a lot there because it was more mental than physical, and they're teaching you this stuff.
Right.
So when that was over, and I went on to, just waiting to get reassigned, and I got reassigned, and I got orders to go to Letterman Army Hospital. And there were 134 of us from Camp Polk that were assigned to it. And we realized what was happening at that time was that the Army general hospitals were packed full with the more seriously injured from World War II. The war's only been over less than a year. And so they need, and all the medics are getting out of the Army, all that. So they really need a whole bunch of new medics there. And so I was one of the 134 that went out. And it's probably one of the last troop trains in the history of the Army, because they put us on this train in Louisiana, and it took us a week just to get across the state of Texas, and they wouldn't let us off this stupid train. They had a second lieutenant in charge. He's afraid everybody would go AWOL if they let us off, and after about a week, he probably had a good...
I'd have bailed, yeah.
The only place he let us off the train is they divided us and let us off for 2 hours in Temple, Texas. The train hit this Temple, Texas. And the reason they let us off there is Temple, Texas is a dry town. They used to have their local option in Texas. And so he figured it'd be safe. I haven't walked 5 feet from the train car when some guy sells me a half pint of whiskey.
So much for being dry.
So much for being dry, yeah.
And of course you didn't buy it, right?
Yes, I bought it. I paid $5 for it. So.
That's like
Yeah,
$30 now.
half a pint of whiskey.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I had the whiskey, and I hit it, and I had a few drinks along the way, and eventually we got to Oakland, California, and they shipped us in Army buses over to Letterman. Like I say, there was 134 people there, and we come in late at night. They sent us to the supply room. They give us these whites to wear, and at 7 the next morning we were in formation. Actually 6:30, we were in formation and assigned to one of the wards over at the hospital. And so we went over there, and of course, unbeknownst to me before that, Those guys work 12-hour shifts, 7 to 7. And it's the most miserable damn work in the world down there.
So much for the good food.
Were bitches to work with. They were all older than we were. We were about 17, 18-year-old kids, mostly 18.
And they were old war horses, huh?
They were old army nurses that hated men. And they hated adolescent boys even worse. They were on their ass all the time. So. But after I was there a week, I went into the first sergeant's office and I said, I want to get a transfer. And he said, well, why? He says, you're at the Presidio, this is one of the best bases in the Army. You got a Class A pass, which means when you're not working, you go in town. You're in San Francisco, great town. I said, yeah, but I live only 20 miles away, and I didn't join the Army to be home. And he said, get the fuck out of here. Out of the 134 people, I was the only one that was there over 6 months, and I spent my whole enlistment there.
Your first enlistment. And your first enlistment was how long total?
3 years.
So you spent the vast majority 20 miles from home.
20 miles from home, yeah, that's right. And but the advantage, you stay there. Well, I wound up making sergeant during that time, which was almost impossible to have done otherwise. Because I went up, I had an affinity for the work, and then I became a ward master, which was in charge of a ward and had ward boys, and really a complicated job and all that, but I loved it. And then I got to know the ward surgeon pretty well. He liked me, and I wanted to work in the operating room, so they got me in the operating room. I worked in the operating room for a year. And my favorite job of all time was working in the operating room. And I was what they call circulating nurse there. But I got discharged there. And out of that whole bunch of guys that went there, I was the only one I think that stayed there. But anyway, that was why I made sergeant. Well, I got out of the Army and went to 20 miles home. And I had no intention of re-enlisting.
It was not a career. You did your stint.
No, but I didn't know what I was going to do.
So you didn't have any master plan.
I didn't know, and I knew I wasn't ready to go to college. I wanted to party more than I wanted to work. And so I was drawing, I belonged to the 5220 Club. That was an unemployment program for discharged servicemen. You could get $20 a week for 52 weeks. So I joined that, and then I went down and started setting pins in the bowling alley too. So
you're getting a few bucks, yeah.
So I'm living it up pretty good. Mother and Jock had gotten divorced in the meantime, and she had rented out all the rooms to working women, including my room. So
you weren't coming home.
First night I was home, it was real quiet. There wasn't a soul in the house, and I'm sleeping on the sofa in the living room. And I wake up about midnight, and I'm pushed up against the edge there. They're having a party in there. There's 3 or 4 people on the couch, and I kind of wake up and somebody puts a drink in my hand, and I'm in my skivvies, and I have to go to the bathroom, and so I survived it. And, the next day, went out in the garage and found some old bed springs and set up a bed out there in the garage.
So you had your privacy in the garage.
Yeah, so that's where I spent that.
And how long were you living there?
Well, I had 90 days to re-enlist to keep my rank, and that was an E5 sergeant, which was really a hard rank to get in those days. If I hadn't worked in the operating room, I'd never gotten it. And so I'm getting a little bit maybe bored with the life of just, I was setting pins, I was drinking a lot of beer, and partying and doing nothing else. I had an affair with one of the girls that was in the house.
Well, yeah, at least one. Jeez.
Yeah, and that was a great. And then she had decided she was in love with me, and she was Mother's best friend in there. And she went and told my mother that she wanted to marry me.
That went over well, did it?
That was when I first decided that maybe re-upping was a good idea.
Get the hell out of town. Was she older than you?
Yes.
She was.
Yes, she was 6 years older than me.
Okay.
We thought about you going to goes. Well, I guess not.
No, we don't want to. No, we just don't want to go there.
No, and I didn't want to go here either, but I did. But anyway, I wound up re-enlisting. I re-enlisted to go overseas, so I was stationed at, for a while at Monterey at, what is the name of the camp there? Forts, no, whatever it is.
Did you take a reduction in rate to
No,
re-enlist?
no, because
You just made the 90-day thing?
I've been out 87 days
Oh, okay.
when I re-enlisted, so I went in as sergeant. I got it made in a way because I really found out in the Army that once you re-enlist, it's a different Army. You're part of the establishment now, you know, and then you get treated a lot different and everything. Of course, I was already a sergeant. And all the re-enlistees had their own barracks there at Camp Beale, that's where it was. And all we had to do was to clean up our barracks in the morning, and then we could go down to the orderly room and get a pass to go into town, Monterey, which was a good town. And since I was the only sergeant, I was in charge, you know, so it was up to me, you know, to clear it, so that when the barracks was clean, I said, okay, go get your passes and stuff. So it was a tough life, you know. And then I went to Camp Stoneman I got orders going to Okinawa. I went to Camp Stoneman, and they had a policy then that if you were a first three grader and you were going overseas, they could pull you off of orders for 30 days and put you to work at Camp Stoneman. They were short of an NCO, so they pulled me off and really pissed me off. And then they put me to work in what we call the tar paper shack, where my job was I had these stacks of files, and I figured out how many days leave they had been on before they had on their way to overseas, and then write it down in their 201 file, they called it. And that was it. And that's what I did, 8 hours a day in a hot camp, you know, right in the hottest place in California in the summer. And I hated it, and I hated the first sergeant in charge. I thought he was a real asshole. And I could never remember whether to count the day that they got back as a day or the day they left as a day. So I said, oh, fuck it, I didn't count either one of them.
You were popular then.
Yes, I mean, I give these guys a break, you know, so I probably fucked up 2,201 files there.
Yeah, but for the benefit of the member, right?
Yeah, well, I'm sure they got caught the regular unit, but a lot of them probably didn't. So ultimately, I wound up then on Okinawa for a year. And, I was stationed at the 34th General Hospital, which later became the Ryukas Army Hospital. And I started out as the ward master in charge of the infectious disease ward, you know, and anyway, which I didn't mind that. That wasn't a bad job. And then what I really wanted to do was work in the operating room, and I couldn't get that job, but I did get into the emergency room and work in what's called the dispensary there, but it's an emergency room for the hospital. And that's where I spent most of my time. Well, the Korean War started about 8 months after I was on Okinawa, and so most of the guys on Okinawa went to Korea right away, and almost all of them got killed. They went in they just threw them in there, and the North Koreans couldn't stop their tanks, and our equipment was bad. Our M1s were World War II war weapons, and we didn't have this training. The men didn't have the training. The non-commissioned officers didn't have the training. Just got killed. Most of them got killed there within 36-hour period there just before the Pusan perimeter got established. And the only reason I didn't go is because I was a sergeant, and the 29th Infantry Regiment, which was stationed on Okinawa, understrength regiment, no training, and mostly 17-year-old guys, 18. But they had a lot of sergeants in their medical company. They had too many sergeants. They didn't want any more sergeants because it's a competitive thing. They didn't want any more sergeants, so they took all the guys that worked for me and but left me behind because of that. And every one of those guys, except one, were killed. And he was captured. He was just one of the few that had managed to escape. So it's probably fortunate,
Well, it sounds like it. We wouldn't be here having this conversation.
You wouldn't be here today if I hadn't been a sergeant, then I guess. But anyway, about 3 months later, I did go on to Korea. And with my exquisite sense of timing, I managed to go into North Korea just about 2 weeks before the Chinese cut everybody off there. So I was among the ones that had to be evacuated eventually. And so that was an interesting period. We had, they didn't know where I was sitting in a replacement depot in Hungnam. They didn't know where my unit was. This is 6th 18th Medical Training Company. They didn't know where it was. And finally they said, well, we think that it's in Wonsan. And there was a train that went from Hungnam to Wonsan. Wonsan was south of where we were at Hungnam. So there was another sergeant and I both go into the same unit, the 618th. And so they put us on this train, and we got to Wonsan, and we noticed there seemed to be a lot of excitement around. And what had happened is the Chinese had captured the rail line just 20 minutes after we had passed.
Ooh.
Of course, we never knew anything about it.
Right.
It's a train ride. In the middle of winter, though. But so we had to find the unit, and they didn't know we were coming or anything, and it was a big mess. And but we saw a Jeep in those days. They put the unit on the Jeep bumper, and there was a Jeep that had 618th, so we stopped them, and yeah, it was, and they took us up, and that's how we joined the outfit. And we were there about 3 or 4 of the longest days of my life, and then we all got into a convoy and went up this dirt road behind lines, kind of, to get back up to Hungnam, where they had a parameter set up. And we got in there and we set up an aid station, or not an aid station, but a kind of an evacuation hospital. And of course, I'm new to the guys, but I didn't long before I get to know everybody. But we had been in the back of those trucks for like 30 hours, and it's about 11 at night, and we come to this open field, snow-covered field, temperature's about 5 above, and say, we're going to start getting patients in 4 hours. and so it was a remarkable thing that these guys, of course, I had just joined them, so I can't take a lot of the credit, but they were out of the trucks, they unloaded the trucks, they had these sectional tents, and each section's about 10 feet long, and then they got the end sections. And you could put 15 of them, you could be 150 feet. Well, we put 9 sections in with the ends. And to get the tent pegs in, they used steel spikes to put the hole in the frozen ground, and they'd put a wooden peg in there and jam it in, and that's how they got it. And the whole company worked on that one first tent first. And then they set up stoves. They had these portable stoves, oil gravity fed them. And so that we had it I would say within an hour, we had that first tent up. And it was being heated. The kitchen crew then went and they put up their kitchen tent and started cooking. And the motor pool went over and put up a tent for the motor pool. The rest of us started putting up a second tent that was a sectional tent. And so by the time we had started the sectional tent, there was a line of ambulances to be unloaded with casualties. And they were all coming out of what they call the reservoir up there. You probably read about the reservoir, where the Chinese had attacked the 7th Division and the 1st Marine Division. And it cut them off. They had to fight their way out of that deal, and had very heavy casualties, but they all had to come through us. And there was an airstrip there, and the next morning there were airplanes, ambulance planes coming in, and we were loading. That's basically what I did. My platoon, part of my platoon, and we just loaded up planes with litters. So you have these big planes. They were the C-54s and C-47s, C-46s, and they have straps hanging down from the ceiling in these planes, and you fit you just leave them on these litters, and they fit. You can put 4 of them up all the way across there. And as soon as we loaded up, the plane would take off and fly them to Japan, and that's what we did for about
So you guys
a week
basically,
or 10 days, and then all the ambulances quit coming, and then we took all the tents down, and they left me and 5 guys behind to get the rest of the stuff because I was the only unmarried sergeant. So that was an honor. So, but we got everything in and didn't get killed.
and
got
from
down
there,
to
where
the-
did you go?
We went to the port, Hungnam. They didn't. Hungnam didn't have any piers or anything. It was shallow. It was too shallow. So we had to leave in these little landing craft. In the middle of winter, it was on Christmas Eve and cold and spray. And there was a cruiser in the inner bay and the inner harbor, and a couple of destroyers that were firing into the shore as we were leaving. And we got the boat. They blew up the docks, and we all headed down to Pusan and joined the war again. So that was kind of an interesting situation.
Wasn't there a great evacuation from one of the harbors there that they still wonder why the Chinese didn't attack as the Americans were leaving? Was it Pusan?
At the time, it occurred to me why the Chinese didn't have the capacity, but I think here's what I found out later on this, that they could, if they'd have sent their Air Force down there, we'd have probably still got most of it off, but they would have killed a lot of people. It was a very small port area that they were downloading from. And I never read anything officially. What I did hear, though, is that the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Army managed to get through to the Russians that if there was an escalation there, it would probably mean an atomic war. Because they would have used the atomic bomb to protect, I think, because there was over 100,000 troops that were isolated up there in North Korea.
Yeah.
And that was just too much to lose. It was the 24th Division, the 7th Division, the 1st Marine Division, 3rd Division, which had just got there. And I think those were the main ones. The 2nd Division had already been basically wiped out to the south of us at a place called Kunri. They were all loaded in trucks evacuating south, and the Chinese caught up with them, and they just went down the road killing everybody in the trucks. They took the most casualties in one day of any battle since the Civil War. They lost 6,000 men in one day in the 2nd Division. So that was And that was south of where I was at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah. But anyway, everything turned out all right, I guess.
Can you tell a story, it seemed like when I was a kid, about they were like you in camps? You know, you were with other soldiers from other countries, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because we worked in the hospital.
Yeah. Did you have a story about the Turks or something?
Yeah.
You say some
That's
kid
pretty,
was,
that's pretty dumb.
some kid was
After we
stealing
got
something?
down south, we didn't have a place to really use our unit. It was a clearing company, it was kind of a bastard unit, and they put us on TDY, and I was working TDY at the Fourth Field Hospital in Tagu. And of course, I had hospital training and experience, so I fit right in. Most of those field medics hadn't had that, but I had. But anyway, I'm working on this floor, and it's a big hospital, and what they did is they primarily would treat the patients that could be treated and then sent back to duty. And otherwise, they would be shipped to, they'd flown to Tokyo Army Hospital. And so you have a lot of femur injuries. It's a type of injury that you get in war. You know, guys get shot in the femur and those kind. And so we had a lot of that and a lot of these serious gunshot wounds. And all we did, what they did is they would do enough surgery to make it possible for them to be transported. And then they transported them. And I had this one Turk in there. We had Turks, we had Ethiopians. They couldn't speak any, I don't even think they spoke Ethiopian. They were really dumb. And
Ethiopians that don't spend
French guys in there, and a lot of Korean soldiers, and a lot of Turk soldiers. And this, you know, when guys are in the hospital in those days particularly, you want them to eat. A lot of times they don't want to eat. They're not hungry, but you want them to eat because it's part of the healing process. And so sometimes you almost force feed them. Well, you know, I didn't have good communication skills with this Turk. But he wouldn't eat his breakfast. So I kind of pushed it down. Well, what I did, I didn't know what a Muslim from anything else. He was a Muslim, and I was forcing him to eat bacon. That guy's probably still looking for me somewhere.
I think it's a little story about some Korean kid that was stealing from the Turks and they killed him or something.
Oh, that happened all the time. They were always catching Koreans stealing. Turks, they'd kill them when they caught them. They'd just take them and shoot them.
Yeah.
And we shot them on occasion, but mostly they weren't. They were just starving Koreans that were stealing to try to make a
Try to
living.
survive,
Yeah, probably. But it was a problem.
Huh.
But that was more after the war than during the war. But it was.
Yeah, the one story where you were driving around, you were on the wrong side of the DMZ line.
Oh, that wasn't the DMZ. That was before that. That was when we first came back from North Korea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you were on the wrong side.
That was a joke. What happened is that we got off the boat, you know, after we'd evacuated up there at Hungnam, and we got off the boat in Busan. We walked through Busan, and then we got on a train, and we were all packed in the one car, and we just all the windows had been shot out of it in the middle of winter. Just a miserable trip. And in fact, the guy next to me had diarrhea. He'd have to get up to go to the John, and every time you get off to John, I'd fall down off my sack. But I couldn't get mad at him. I did get mad at him, but you couldn't help it. Because in the Korean passenger trains, the latrine is a hole in the wall in the floor, and in the middle of winter, there's a certain amount of cold air coming up through there, so it's not a great thing to have. You could hear him moaning all over that car. You know? But anyway, we got to where we go in a town called Gwangju, and I hadn't got much sleep or anything. And and they were going. The 8th Army had a problem of getting all these units that had come down from North Korea. They had to get them reassigned, and because the Chinese are still coming, advancing down there. So get back into some kind of a military thing, and we had enough troops we were able to do it. But our location was to be in where we were assigned to be was a town called Mariang. We were in a town called Gwangju, where the train had let us on. So this captain and lieutenant, they got the job of locating the place we were supposed to be, a schoolhouse in Mariang. And so I and another sergeant, another 2 sergeants, we got drafted to ride shotgun with these guys. So we're riding across these very desolate hills and dirt road, 2-lane dirt road, and don't see anything, don't hear anything. It's a clear day, cold but clear. And we're driving for about 40 minutes, and we come to the Canadian unit with their guns pointed our direction. And we had gone through for 40 minutes an area that was not secured by the United Nations. The North Koreans were in charge of it to cut off North Korean troops. Uneventful trip, but it just the same. It was a little bit. The Canadians were dumbfounded to see us coming the wrong way on that road. So anyway, we got to Mariang, and the sergeant and I were left behind to keep the schoolhouse. Well, 8th Army headquarters. That was the Army that took the big beating. Their headquarters company came in, and they just took over the schoolhouse. Fuck you guys. They didn't even bother to say it. They just took it over. And I stood out there. We're trying to say it, and he said, "Well, they didn't. Your unit didn't register, so we're taking it." So our whole company comes up after a hard day on the road in a convoy, and they don't have any place to go. Here, the other sergeant are standing out in the middle of the road. Very unpopular. I said, what are we going to do? These guys are generals and colonels, you know. And anyway, I felt sorry for them because that was a headquarters company, and they'd lost all but 2 of their enlisted men in their headquarters company.
Jeez.
And they were really down. I mean, they were using a Red Cross canteen car as a mess hall. And that was the headquarters. It's a really fucked up deal. So, anyway, that's about the more
What time is it?
interesting.
Tintel. Well, I guess we could stop for now, and then when we come back after lunch, we can get the last part.
About how I won the war.
How you won the war, how you met Mom,
And that,
you know,
yeah,
all those fun things.
Yeah, I've done too much talking already.
Okay.
It'll bore people to death.
Well, maybe, but we're doing it anyway.
Okay, maybe.
Well, this is day 2 at the beach as far as our talk with Dad. It's a beautiful day so far. You can see the weather so far is blue and sunshiny. Here's the same shot as yesterday, only today, of course, a little bit nicer. You can see out in the distance a fishing boat of some sort. There it is. So we're picking it up. This is just to Dad's talk. This is picking it up from about halfway through his service and forward from there. Go ahead.
Okay, this is day 2 of my little odyssey here that we've been talking about. I was in Korea when we left off, I was to spend a total of 10 months in Korea after I got there. After we came down from North Korea, the unit that I was in wasn't really assigned a mission anywhere. They were kind of a bastard unit. And so they provided temporary staff to other medical units. And the first one of those that I did was I was in charge of setting up an aid station at the Republic of Korea airstrip at Daejeon, and that was a movie was made of that particular unit, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, about Colonel Hess, who was the commanding officer of it. He flew more missions in Korea than any other American, and but at the aid station we really didn't have much to do. It was kind of interesting. We'd go in and there was not that many, it's not that large at that time, and we would have, the thing that sticks to me is having meals in the mess hall and watching the pilots who all sat together, and they were a mixture of Americans and Japanese and a few Koreans. There weren't many Koreans that were trained pilots. And to me it was interesting. This was only 5 years after the end of World War II, and sitting there having breakfast together and laughing and joking and working together were ex-Zero pilots from the Japanese Air Force in World War II and American pilots, and they had actually probably faced each other in combat at one time or another, and here they were all together. That's interesting the way those things can work out. I was there only about a month and a half. And then I was on temporary duty with the 4th Field Hospital, which was located in Daegu, and that was the largest hospital, military hospital in Korea at that time. And they actually received patients directly from combat. They would put them on trains and bring them down. And mostly what we did was take care of the ones that had relatively minor injuries until they were able to go back to duty, and then the more serious, which was most of them, would wind up being flown to Japan, to the Army Hospital in Japan. And many of them would then go home from there. It was interesting. It was not that much difference from working in a military hospital anywhere else. And so I did that for several months. Then I went back to my unit, and then I was assigned to the 121st VAC Hospital in Yongsan-po, which is very similar to what I'd done at the 4th Field Hospital. And that was the last duty that I had in Korea. Because I had spent a year on Okinawa, I had more points on a point system as to when you can go home. You had to get so many points. Well, I had accumulated 1 year of points on Okinawa, then I had 4 months of points in combat, which is 4 points a month, and then about 6 months in support units, which was 2 points a month. But anyway, it worked out that in my unit I had more points than anyone, so I was the first one to come home, which I did, and came home on a troop ship.
And how long were you there before you got to come home?
I was on Okinawa a year, and I was in Korea 10 months. So I'd been gone 22 months, and I was just turned 23, and I was 23 years old, and I had been in the Army 6 years.
Wow.
And including 22 months overseas. I came home, and for some crazy reason, I was assigned to Fort Benning, Georgia, which is where the infantry school. And what it was that when I finished basic training, I had taken an infantry basic. And since I was coming back from Korea and they really needed people with experience to help train the troops, so to speak. Not that I had any real combat experience in the infantry, but anyway, I wound up in the infantry school and a demonstration team, and, which we would every so often, well, just about twice or three times a week, we'd shoot the hell up a hill in Georgia. While they had a grandstand of a bunch of visiting
Dignitaries
soldiers from other countries and Americans, and it was called the Infantry Squad in Action. So, and that was kind of fun. We used nothing but tracers so that they could see that, and you know, it was interesting. We would go up the hill, and there's a little bit to it. It's kind of interesting. A pretty easy job, really. And maybe in the middle of the afternoon we'd be done for the day. But anyway, I wanted to be back into the medics, and so I transferred to the medics and went to Percy Jones Army Hospital, which was in Michigan, Battle Creek, Michigan. Very nice place to work. It was the old Kellogg Sanatorium, and they had converted it into an Army hospital in World War II. And then they had closed it, and then they had reopened it in the Korean War. And what they did in the Army General Hospitals is, and there was 8 or 9 of them in the United States, I forget all of them now, but they, when you were wounded and had a long-term condition, you went to the general hospital closest to your home. And so the people that were from the upper Midwest would go to Battle Creek. And so it was a good station. I started out as a ward master, but was able to wind up working in the operating room there again, which is my favorite job. So I worked in the operating room at Percy Jones. Good job. We were always done by noon, just about. And
well, that's good. What'd you do after that?
and so they ran a kind of little training school too. So we trained guys how to be circulators, and this was one where the Letterman, I didn't do any scrubbing, which is the sterile nurse in a surgery. But at Percy Jones I did, particularly the neurosurgeon liked me, and so whenever he was doing surgery, I was his scrub nurse, as they called it. I'd be sitting there holding a retractor and a brain and all kinds of neat things. So anyway, a good job, but the director of nursing called me in and said, you know, they're opening up a school, and it's a new program in the Army, and it's a 1-year course for medical, and she said, I think you ought to maybe apply for that, and I did. And so I wound up in San Francisco at Letterman, where I had spent 3 years before, and now I'm back there going to school. And it was called the Clinical Technician Program at that time. Now then the Army still has that program. It's called the LPN program in the Army now. And we did, in fact, the Army gave us some additional courses so we qualified to take the examination for LPN. And so all of us took the examination. All of us in this unit, since it was the first year, I'd say 80% of them were combat veterans, many from the Second World War and a bunch from Korea. And so anyway, it was a 48-week course, and I learned a lot in that course. And it was while I was going to that course that I met your mother, and we wound up getting married not too long after we met.
Now, that's kind of interesting right there. How come the fast marriage from, you know, you said not long after we met. How long was that?
Well, to put it this way, but we may have been living together before we got married. But we got married in May. We got married on my mother's birthday, actually. We went up to Reno. Her family was absolutely opposed to the marriage. It was really, and probably to the point where they got me pissed off, and I might not have married her if I hadn't have been so pissed off at them. You know, I didn't want her to get married then anyway. You know.
But just because they didn't want it, that made you want it all the more.
It just,
Yeah.
And Barbara, it was really tough on Barbara.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was really a tough situation for her, and it was really not. They really treated her pretty bad. I never did forgive them for it. And you know, later on, after they decided, even though I was Protestant, I obviously didn't believe in birth control. That you know, we more or less had a family relationship, but I never was close to them at all. I never really, in my mind, wanted to have anything to do with them. In fact, after we got married, and it wasn't too long after we got married that the school ended, and actually it was about 6 months after we got married, and I'd been in the Army long enough that I could just about dictate where I wanted to be stationed. And I could have stayed at Letterman, and instead, though, I went down and told them I wanted to go to Texas, to the Brooke Army Hospital. And the main reason was I wanted to get Barbara away from her damn family, you know. And so I did, and we went there. And
Now, she wasn't
it was a smart thing.
Was she happy she left or not happy?
I think she was happy. I think she was under a lot of stress and everything, and this worked out better. It was a good station there, and she didn't like Texas.
No, I remember her talking about the bugs, especially.
The scorpions in the bathtub, that was it for her. You know, that kind of prejudiced her against the whole state of Texas.
Now, you kind of skipped over meeting Mom. How did you meet her?
Well, that's interesting because it was a blind date on New Year's Eve, and Janet's my sister Janet was living in San Francisco, and she was married to this guy, and he was kind of a flake, you know, to say the least. He wanted to be a singer in a band, and he didn't quite have it, you know. But he was okay, but kind of irresponsible. But he worked for Slate Lock, and Barbara was his boss, and she was, you know her, and she was hard on him. You know, she expected him to perform whether he liked it or not. and so the only time he ever saw me was when I was off duty, when I was partying. So he figured that all I was what they now call a party animal, but actually I was very serious at my job. But when I was off, I would.
We had some fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't married, didn't have any responsibilities there. A sergeant pay and single, that's not bad money. And so he thought it'd be a joke. He set up a blind date for New Year's Eve. And I showed up, and I had no intention. I wasn't really thoroughly convinced that this was what I wanted to do. I'd had all set up a New Year's Eve party, and I had to cancel, you know, my plans on that. And there was a pick up Barbara. What she wanted to do? She wants to go to a movie. New Year's Eve, she wants to go to a movie. You know. So we go to a movie, and after the movie, we go to her apartment. She was living in downtown. Well, not downtown, but not too far from downtown San Francisco. She had a roommate, and so I had you know, it's a New Year's Eve, so they decided they wanted to drink. All they had in the house, they had some gin, or vodka. They had some vodka, but they didn't have any mix. And so I really wanted to drink because I hadn't had one all night, and I had to sit through that stupid movie. And anyway, you know, not the high point of my social life at that time. And so she had some canned peaches, so I drained the juice off the canned peaches and mixed it with the vodka.
Well, that's
And
creative.
she always said, I should have known then.
Yeah, that should have been her run, quickly run.
Yes,
An
yes. But
indicator.
anyway, without going through the details, we wound up, and I didn't have any objections to getting married in the church, and but you had to take instructions in those days.
Right.
There were 12 of them, and they put us off because Jareen is behind the scenes there, doing everything she can to break up the marriage. She wants to get it annulled, she wants all that. By this time, Barbara's pregnant.
And that was another story there, wasn't it? Because for years you told everybody that your anniversary was February 7th.
Well, that was Jareen that did that. Jareen announced our marriage in the Calistoga paper for February 7th. And of course, she announced it in May. But anyway, we went. Well, I was going through the instructions, and they put us off for about 3 weeks for the first one. And then I had the first one. All you did is talk about birth control, which I didn't have any opinion one way or the other on. And then he set up the next meeting for a month later. We got to get 12 of the damn things.
So they're trying to stretch out a year.
Barbara and I, after that meeting, we went out to where we usually went. We'd go close to where she lived there and have a little cafe, She always had coffee and something to eat, She was very quiet after that, and she said, "Let's go to Reno and get married." And I couldn't back out of it. That's too much committed. And so, she called up a couple of her friends, and we went up to Carson City.
Right then, that day, or?
It was either that day or the next day.
Wow.
Because the next day we went up there. And it happened to be on May 3rd, which is your grandmother's birthday.
Oh.
And that was my mother's birthday.
Right.
And we went up to Carson City and got married and came back. And then she called Charlie, that's Jareen's husband.
Right.
And it was 80 miles, and it took him about an hour to get there. And he came in just raising holy hell. And I'm sitting there, pissed off anyway.
Right, just because.
Yeah, I didn't. I wasn't even sure I wanted to get married. And here I have this guy yelling at me, and did he go wrong to he killed me and all this stuff. And I just had it. And I just stood up. I'm pretty strong man, and Charlie wasn't that big. And
No, he never was.
I picked him up by the arms and banged him up against the wall, and he bounced off the wall. I hit him, threw him against the wall again. Barbara screaming in the background.
Oh, I can imagine.
And then I opened the door and threw him down the steps. And I didn't see Charlie for a year and a half after that. And he always was a little bit
Made himself scarce.
antsy about it, but anyway, I got along with him after we'd been married a while, and after we demonstrated quite effectively that we were not into birth control by having 6 kids in 6 years. That'll do it. So anyway, it was a tough time for Barbara.
Well, that Catholic guilt thing.
It was more serious in those days.
Yeah.
I didn't wind up anti-Catholic or anything. I went to church with your mother a lot. Yeah, we'd go to church on religious days, I
Yeah.
got to know the High Mass in Latin better than most Catholics do it. So, but it was.
So let's talk about San Antonio a little more, because you had Steve and Kathy while you were there.
Yeah. And she was already pregnant with Steve when we went there, and he was born in December, of course. And
And so that's 1953.
1953, yeah. And I was working where I wound up doing at Fort Sam Houston, Brooke Army Hospital, which is in Fort Sam Houston, Texas. That was the Army's tuberculosis center, tuberculosis was a disease of the young to a large extent. And so you'd have a lot of military guys. They didn't have good treatment for it then too much. They bed rest for maybe a year, you know.
Yeah.
And so I wound up as a non-commissioned officer in charge of the TB center. I had probably about 300 corpsmen and WACs under. I did the scheduling and all that, but I also worked in it as a nurse, actually. Because as LPN, the nurses, the RNs, they looked at that as an invitation to give us all the jobs they didn't like doing, you know. And so that's okay. I didn't mind it, and I kind of liked the work. But it was an interesting time because they came up, a hospital in Pennsylvania, they came up with a new treatment for tuberculosis that was effective. It involved streptomycin, a drug called ditubin, and paramino salicylic acid. I still remember them. And so it was extremely effective, particularly on the younger, healthy ones. And I wound up discharging these guys, 3 months after they'd been admitted. When I told them when they had been them, they'd be there for a year. Just the way it worked out. And so, and actually, what eventually happened after I left was they even closed the TB hospital. They didn't need it anymore. So one of the modern miracles of medicine that really was revolutionary at the time. And I was right in the middle of it there. We were the second facility in the United States that implemented that treatment plan. The one was where it's developed in some hospital in Pennsylvania, So kind of interesting times. And I was home about, I think I was at San Antonio about 15 months until 1955, and then I got orders to go back to Korea again. By this time, the war's over in Korea. I mean, the fighting's over. It's still kind of a mess over there, but and it's different going. When I was single, it was no big deal really in a lot of ways. My life was in my barracks bag, But I've got a wife and Kathy and Steve, and you were on the way.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna say I was
so
born when you were in Korea.
That's when I decided, to get out of the Army when my enlistment was up. I decided, and it was really tough on Barbara, as you can imagine. And that's why we moved to Idaho, is because her twin sister Bev lived in Napa, and there was somebody there that could help.
But you weren't going to move to California. You weren't going to be close to Jareen in
California. And at that point in time, too, we couldn't bring dependents to Korea, so that we were kind of stuck. But anyway, and I was attached to a MASH hospital, actually the MASH hospital, although years after the war was over, a couple of years after the war was over. And it was a semi-permanent hospital. We were about 12 miles from the DMZ, which meant that if the Chinese decided to attack or the North Koreans decided to attack, we had about 20 minutes to try to get the hell out of there.
Jeez, that's not much time.
Not much time. It's something you think about sometimes. But it was not a bad job. There was 2 clinical techs, and I wound up as and they used us as nurses over there. It was an experiment, actually. And I was the chief nurse of the medical ward. We didn't have any female nurses, except that we had 2 Army major nurses that were there to evaluate, to see if they could operate MASH hospitals without female. See, different times. They would never do that now. politically incorrect altogether. But anyway, in those days too, they were really, the nurses discriminated against male nurses. They could not get commissioned. They would have to come in as enlisted men, even though they were, and most of them were either anesthesiologists or not anesthetists, or else they were surgical nurses. And they'd be a private or a PFC, and usually they were just in because there was a draft at that time, and they'd put their time in and then go back to civilian life. So we had a couple of those guys there. The director of nurses was a PFC, Army male nurse, and the chief of the operating room. And then I was the head nurse of the medical ward there. And I also worked the evening shift, so I was in charge of the emergency room too.
Now, were you an E6 by this time, or
What?
were you an E6 or an E5?
I was an E6. I'm 86 in San Antonio.
Okay.
Yeah, I remembered it was the day before Steve was born.
Oh.
I'm 86, December 2nd. I always remembered that date. That's how I remember Steve's birthday.
You hear that, Steve?
Yeah, so anyway, and so I was gone 16 months, and it was really hard on Barbara. You were born about, when you were born in August, about halfway through my tour.
Now, Mom had a tough time delivering me, as I was
She
told.
did. They gave her last rites at. You were born in the Air Force Hospital
Mountain Home.
at Mountain Home because in those days they didn't have the Champus program,
Oh.
so you had to go to the nearest military facility for care from Dependence Step, and that happened to be Mountain Home. There wasn't that many in Idaho, so that's where you were born, and why. But she came out of it. The Red Cross was ready to bring me home, but
So it wasn't that I was in any distress, it was that she was.
she was, yes.
Hmm.
Yes. And so anyway, I don't know the whole story there because I wasn't there, but
Right.
it was a close deal, I guess. But anyway, I came home the following May. I hadn't seen you until you were then 9 months old. And they were living in Nampa, and I was still in the Army. But I had decided to leave the Army, and so I was stationed at Madigan at Fort Lewis. I didn't like the job. I worked in the recovery room with surgery, because what had happened in the Army medics in the state is they'd started hiring civilians. They started doing that when I was at Letterman. Well, civilians never leave. They stay there their whole career, and so they get promoted. And after a few years, you went to an Army military hospital in the United States, all the good jobs were taken by civilians. All the jobs that a sergeant might have had in the old days.
Right.
And so all you got was a crappy job that no civilian wanted, It just really screwed up everything, I think. And I was against it at that time. But that isn't the major reason I got out, but it certainly added to my motivation to get out. And so I had re-enlisted, at the previous time I re-enlisted, I had gone on what they call indefinite. I re-enlisted for an indefinite period. And that meant that after 3 years I could get out with just submitting a letter of resignation. So I got to Madigan, and I had about almost 5 years on that enlistment, so I submitted my letter and got discharged there.
What was the date of your discharge, do you remember?
Yeah, August, I think, it's pretty close, August 15th of 1956. And so when you subtract the 87 days I was out between my first and second husband, I mean I was just 20 days short of 10 years active service.
And when you
I was 20, just turned 28 years old.
and Mom was pregnant with Ken at that time.
She was. We didn't really know it yet.
Okay.
But she was pregnant with Ken. Ken was the first one we had to pay for.
And you paid for him for years.
Yeah. So I decided I wanted to go to college. I knew I didn't want to be a doctor. I knew I didn't want to be a nurse. And I knew I couldn't go to nursing school because of the way nursing schools were set up. I wouldn't have been able to work on the outside. And I knew I was going to have to work. I wasn't going to get any help anywhere from anybody, and didn't. And so, really, when I went to sign up at the college, they wanted to say, well, what major? And I said, well, I think I know I don't want to be a nurse. I think I'd like to be a hospital administrator. And they said, well, you had some master's course. So she said, I think maybe if you took accounting, that would be a good course for you to take. I had no idea what accountants did. But anyway, the interesting thing, well, of course, the story. I did go into accounting, and that became my occupation. The interesting thing, I worked in hospital accounting, which is one of the better jobs, finance managers of a hospital. And in all the years I worked in civilian hospitals, I never met a hospital administrator that knew anything about accounting.
They didn't want to know.
Most of them were capable of it anyway. It's one of these types of things. So I was, but it gave me a pretty good occupation actually, and so.
And you went to College of Idaho for that?
I went to the College of Idaho primarily because that was close to Barbara was living. It was in Idaho. Caldwell, and she was living in Napa at the time. It was only 8 miles away, and she had applied for me, and they'd sent me an application. It's the only application I had for college. I filled it out and sent it back to her, and they accepted me. They accepted me on probation because my last year in high school I had gotten very good grades. I was working all the time. I didn't study until it was absolutely necessary or critical. But anyway, I had managed to get my graduation barely, and but so I was on the I just accepted, with under that I had to. Do the work or I was going to be kicked out, But I was older, wiser, and I really liked college. And I hadn't liked high school, but I liked college. And I liked the College of Idaho. It was a good school, good professors. And I really got into it. And so the first semester, they were on a semester system. I made the dean's honor list. They go, well, one thing, I'm older, and I'm not out playing around, and there's time. I was working full time. I was working full time at Caldwell Hospital as an LPN. But I could work. The nice thing about hospitals, it's 24 hours a day, so you can work shifts that will coordinate with what your classes are. And I did that for about 7 or 8 months, and then the administrator called me in, and I didn't even know him because, you work in nursing, you don't have anything to do with those guys. And the chief nurse had recommended me for the bookkeeping job there because they'd had to fire the bookkeeping because she had embezzled. And there was a school in embezzlement there because she'd embezzled about 6 different ways that I found out about later.
Wow.
She didn't miss a trick. But anyway, and his dad was a professor at the college, the administrator. And so he said, well, he thought it was important, and he said, you can work your your work hours around your class schedule. So that's what I did. That's how I got through college. By the time I was a senior in high school, or senior in college, I was making more money at the hospital than I could make as a beginning accountant. And actually the toughest thing financially for me in that whole situation was after I finished school. Because while I was going to school, I had a GI Bill, which was $160 a month. Plus I was making this almost the same amount of money that I was able to make in my first accounting job. And that's where we went to Klamath Falls, and crappy job. I worked for Johns Manville. I did not like it.
Now, before, I'm trying to keep this chronologically with the
Yeah.
kids. By then, let's see, Connie was born in Caldwell.
Yes.
And so Ken's born, Connie is born, and then you go. Then you went to Klamath Falls.
Then we went to Klamath Falls, and Linda was born not too long after.
Right,
we
in
got
August of
there.
1960.
About 6 months after we got there.
Oh, okay.
And they closed that plant, so there wasn't much available in Klamath Falls, but I took the examination for the state of Oregon Tax Commission, and I got a high grade on it and got accepted and so I worked for the state tax commission for 6 years. Good job.
But not
Sometimes that's-
not all 6 years in Klamath Falls, right?
No, what happened, is that we had been in Caldwell, Idaho. Well, the state tax commission had a tax office in Ontario, which is right on the border, right across the river from Payette, and you know where it is. But when they had this opening, and it meant a promotion for me to go. And what happened, all the people that lived west of the mountains, not any of them wanted to go to eastern Oregon. And so, and I had done fairly well, and so they figured I could do it. So I got promoted and became a field auditor for the tax commission. I'd only been with the tax commission for 6 months, and usually took 3 years to get to be a field auditor. But and
And
it
so
worked
that's when
out.
you moved us to Ontario.
And that's where we moved.
How did you
to.
find that house on the hill in Ontario, 189 10th Street?
It just happened. I don't
Yeah.
remember
I
exactly.
remember the
details.
rent was $85 a month.
Yes, but that was
I know, a long
hard
time
in
ago.
those days.
Yeah.
Well, I was looking. It just happened I was looking at the right time, and because we were out on Oregon Slope, and that house was really not acceptable at all. And plus the fact I was starting to get paid, I'd gotten a big raise when I came out, and I had the money to afford a better place. So, and it just happened to come due, and we stayed there for 5 years, I guess.
Yeah, all but the last, year we
Yeah,
were in
right.
Ontario.
Yeah, I
And
bought
you
that
worked
one
with
house.
Joe Tucker, he was your boss?
Yes, good boss. Joe loved it because Joe lived for hunting and fishing. I wouldn't walk across the street to shoot the biggest bull elk in the world, I was not into it.
Right.
Well, that meant that he didn't have to split the days off during hunting season.
So
And
he was happy you were there.
He's prepared to give me half of it, half of the hunting season. When he told me I didn't really want it, he was tickled to death, because then he could have it all, Joe was a good guy. I worked 6 years for him.
And you used to travel to different places like John Day, as I remember.
I did go to John Day a couple of times. It was really outside our area.
Yeah.
I mostly went to Baker. It's now Baker City.
Right.
I went there once a month, and I usually went to Burns once a month. I do audits down in Burns. I do audits in Baker. I did a lot of auditing of cattle ranches. Got to be something of an expert on taxation as it relates to cattle. The Oregon law was very similar. It wasn't identical, but it was very similar to the federal law in most aspects of it. So, why don't you take a little break here on me?
Okay, we'll start again. Okay, now we're back, taking it from, I guess, most of the way through Ontario.
Well, yes. What happened? I decided I wanted to be a CPA, and so I got a correspondence course. You know, to learn to be able, as I studied for the test, and I managed to pass the examination in 2 sittings, which was quite good in those days.
Yeah, didn't it take several typically to get through that?
Yeah, there were several sections there, and the first time I got through auditing, because I was working kind of in auditing, but I didn't do too well on problems, and I almost passed law and all that. And anyway, without going into details, the second time I sat, I passed, because you had to carry over the ones that passed the first time. And I decided I wanted to do something with it, and there was a job opening in Blue Cross of Oregon, and I applied for it and got it.
And this was in Portland.
Auditor. So I was in Medicare right at the early days of Medicare. Good job, but I hated Blue Cross.
And this was in Portland.
And this was in Portland.
And did
It
you
was a good
work?
job, but that's when we moved to Vancouver.
Right. Did you work in Portland for a while before we came across, or did no?
Only a short time. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Why'd you
your
choose
mother-
that?
Your
Why'd you-
mother had to go to the hospital, long-term hospital.
Oh,
And so I had to bring you out here, you know, and she wasn't even with us at that point.
boy, I don't remember that. Then she was. I think she had some nervous breakdown issues, or
It was depression, severe depression. She lost a baby, and
Right.
that created. She'd lost a couple of them.
but Johnny was the hard one.
That was the hard one, and then she had a couple of miscarriages along the way besides. Anyway, it was tough on her. And so she had to go to the state hospital, and I was taking care of you guys and working, and you were all in Ontario, so I brought you to Vancouver, and I got the place for a stay, that trailer. I rented it for a while until I could find something else. And so that was the start of my new life. Didn't start on a high note, but I was at Blue Cross for about 6 months, and then decided to go out on my own, working on Medicare cost reports, and that was quite successful. Made more money than I'd ever made there for a while, but what happened is I was not a CPA, and the CPA firms that did the auditing resented me coming in and grabbing that, and they pretty well put me out of business. And in the meantime, I had developed a system for doing the home health agency billing. Sat down with a contract programmer and my own time and everything, and did. I came up with the first program that ever worked for home health agencies. At the time it worked. It's complex. It's quite a good program. But I knew I didn't know enough about business or anything, so that's when I got hooked up with Jorgensen, and he was a bad choice. And he took it, and we actually incorporated, went public with it, were quite successful. We were selling it.
What was the name of your company?
Datacom, as I recall.
Okay.
Data something, I forget.
And you hired a secretary, as I remember, or an
Well, I
office
had
manager.
An office up in Vancouver.
Yeah.
We had an office in Oakland, California, and then the one in Eugene. Anyway, long story short, he took the money that we had from the stock issue and put it in some other product thing that he wanted to get into. Lost all the money. The shareholders got pissed off that people had lasted and killed the corporation. And they didn't know what they had. And that software that we had developed, they thought since the company went broke that the software was no good. Well, the guy that I hired as a manager put together some guys down in California, and they bought the software, the rights to the software. Of course, I'm left out in the cold. And I didn't mind. I liked the guy down there, and I was glad to see it, the continuation of it, even though I was not a part of it. And he told me, he said, you know, we made the first month of billings that we had, we got all our money back that we paid for the program. He said, those guys were really stupid up there in Eugene. But in the meantime, I go on to other things, and I went to work for another data processing company that was related. And their client that they were installing a system on was St. Joseph Hospital in Aberdeen, which was a sister hospital to St. Helen. And the administrator and the controller there thought it was pretty good, and so he recommended me to Sister Virginia Chehalis as a controller. So, because I needed a job anyway, I'd worked for this guy, but this one outfit, and they went out of business about 2 months after I went to work for them. Not because of me.
I was going to say
Not because
that's a
of me.
strange coincidence there. Dan.
I had made it work in Aberdeen, but none of the other guys could make it work. So whatever, I wound up then spending 6 years at St. Helen. And then, of course, I met Roy and wound up going into public accounting with Roy, even though I'd never been in public accounting. I had to learn on the job, which is not a good way to learn it. But it led on to where I eventually became self-supporting on it.
Yeah, well, you guys did pretty well for a while. You and Roy. You had Craig and Kalich.
We did real well.
You even bought a motor home there at one point, as I remember.
For 3 days, but
3 days.
That's another. That's
Okay.
another thing. We brought another.
I remember
guy
Mom
in.
was against it.
Yeah, Ed Will came in. And
Ed Will, yeah.
Yeah, Ed Will was a wild man, and he and Roy didn't hit it off just from day one, and Ed was nuts anyway. And but anyway, so everything went to hell there, but we got out of it clean. We knew we were in financial trouble, but nobody else knew we were in financial trouble. So we had built up this organization, and we weren't going to have enough cash to get to the next tax season because it's primarily a tax practice. And so Roy and I, we decided what he did. He went to one bank and borrowed money to buy me out. I went to another bank and borrowed money to buy Roy out. And then we paid all the bills, and then he took the accounting, and I took the data processing part of it. And then I went to work for Ron Dolly, and I worked for him.
In Olympia.
In Olympia. And I worked for him,
And this was like 1975?
so a little later than that, 70,
80?
yeah, late 75,
Okay.
76, I guess. Is 75. So anyway, it kind of got us up to the, and what I've been doing ever since is related to what I had left over.
Well, before you went with Ron Dolly, though, you had Data Pros in Chehalis, and Kathy was
Well,
with
that
you
was
on
just
that.
part of the breakup of Roy. We took that
Okay.
over just.
You did that for a while.
That didn't work at all because Kathy was not. If she didn't get paid, she didn't want to do any work. And
Well,
she
I
would
feel
do-
the same
I couldn't
way.
get any work done and get to bill her because she didn't want to do the work or whatever.
I got news for you. I won't work for no pay either.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, we could probably have done a little better, but we weren't doing it. I didn't get involved in that as an idea of a future. It was just a way to get cleaned up from the problems that we had. You know, when Roy divorced his wife and got together with his first cousin, we were getting 3 or 4 calls a day from clients in Chehalis that were canceling out. They'd call me up, Carl, I really like you, but my wife says
You know, we're going to show this
we
to
can't do this to
we're going to show this to Roy unless you give some money.
I would do that. Roy would do his thing, all right. We were
Walk in
both
front
at
of the
fault
camera.
on that a little bit.
I
Yeah.
know I'm walking in front of the camera.
So,
So anyway, that was kind of gets me up to the modern era. You guys have been around since then, and there's no sense going into detail.
Well, yeah, but
I went up to Virginia Mason, and I had a good job there, but I didn't
in
like
Seattle. And
Oh,
yeah, you
that's
didn't
good.
like it. You did it for how long?
it. Oh, 5 months or something like that.
Yeah. I remember I had lunch with you one time when you were working there, and you didn't want to go back.
No, it was one of those jobs where it was if I didn't want to do any work, they loved me. Nobody did any real work there. They had some clerical people that did all the working, and that they didn't want to make any waves or anything. They had a $50,000 a month out of processing department that couldn't even run the payroll once without screwing it up. Nobody knew how much the accounts receivable were at that hospital, including the auditors, but they went ahead and would give us a clean audit anyway.
Well,
Rick said you talked about Ontario. Did you talk about coaching baseball and stuff?
No, he didn't
No, I
talk
didn't
about
talk
that.
about that.
Or the Cub Scouts and all that.
The
yeah.
president of the PTA.
Yeah, well, maybe
I
we
did
can.
those things on the side. Your mother got me into those things.
Yes, I understand.
I remember baseball going to all those little Dinkwater towns.
Yeah.
That was fun, especially as a kid.
Well, and I remember too that Dad was really hung up on you catching the ball with two hands.
Yeah,
And if you didn't catch it with two hands,
with one knee on the ground.
he would drag you. Well, you were in center field. I remember he called you out of a game in the middle of an inning once because you caught the ball one-handed, and he says, "Get off the field."
I don't remember that.
I do.
I probably blanked that out in my memory.
Yeah.
You're probably dead
Regression.
for good reason.
And then
Whatever.
Cub Scouts, I remember that. Yeah, that was mostly Mom, but
That was mostly your mother, and it's interesting. Kind of, I guess, the side issue there is that she asked me if she could be a den mother.
yes, I
And I said,
remember.
well, no, just don't get me involved.
Yeah, that was your fatal
But your
error.
mother could not drive, so she had to go to the PAC meetings. So about our first PAC meeting, and she really was a go-getter, and she'd build up the PAC, and she'd got some other women to do it, and all of a sudden we had the Cub Scout program was practically non-existent, and then after your mother got involved with it and all, all of a sudden we got half the kids in town in it, and so I was at the PAC meeting, the first PAC meeting after she was a den mother, and I'm sitting in the back, and I have to be there because she can't drive. That's the only reason I'm there is because
Yeah.
she can't drive.
Yeah.
And there were 8 or 9 people there at the PAC meeting, and I'm just sitting back bored. And PAC master sat up. He says, "I've had enough. I am quitting. You're just going to have to find somebody else to do this."
Just something to quit, huh?
And I'm the only man there, and they immediately elected me the PAC master.
You're looking around.
You know what happened.
I'm looking around. Hey, I don't know anything about this stuff. I got a book on it.
Yeah.
Well, let's.
But anyway, like I say, your mother and some other women that she got, they were really kind of go-getters. And all of a sudden we had a big PAC. Well, we had our first PAC meeting, and it was up at the church, and we went up there, and I said, I wonder what's going on. There's no parking here. And I go in there, there's 90 people at that PAC meeting, and I'm not used to getting up before groups, and I didn't like that at all, and I kind of struggled through it.
Yeah.
And the next day, I called up Toastmasters Club and joined the Toastmasters
That's how you got
Club.
into that.
That's how I got into that, yeah. So,
Well-
90 people.
90 people, I mean.
I guess they were bored in town, huh?
Yeah, we really
It was
had a
Ontario,
Yeah.
Go-getter. We did pretty well on that.
I have trouble imagining Mom being a go-getter for some.
She was in a quiet
was.
way.
In a quiet way, she was.
Yeah.
She was driven.
She was driven, and she did a good job on anything she
Well, I remember
did.
she was a good den mother.
Yeah, she was.
Well, could we talk a little bit? You kind of skipped over health issues, like in what was it, 1991, where you had a heart attack?
Well, I was 64, whatever year that was.
Why do we want to talk about that?
Because it's an interesting story,
Oh, okay.
All right, yeah, I had a heart attack.
and you'd had breakfast with Roy that
well,
morning.
yeah, actually, we had a meeting we'd done an audit for the teachers union at Centralia College, and they had asked for a morning meeting because of they didn't want to. They wanted to be on their regular schedule for their classes and everything during the day, so we had the meeting in the morning. And I was walking across the campus, and I started having chest pains. But I didn't think too much about it. A little uncomfortable. And then Roy had collected a check for me from another audit that we'd done, and he had it over at his at the burger place there. And so after we had breakfast after the meeting with the college at the old Candlelight.
Remember the
Oh, yeah.
candlelight?
And so then I was going ahead, and we both had our car because we'd both driven to the college, and so he went on there and he told me he had a check there, and I said, well, I'll come pick it up. So I was going there. I got to 13th, and the pain was getting kind of heavy. And I said, you know, if this is what I think it could be, I'd be dumb not to go to the hospital, which was one of the more smart things.
Probably
I
one of the
thought.
smartest things you.
But I got off on 13th, and so I drove from 13th to Mellon, and the pain is getting worse all the time. And so I kind of came up, went to the hospital, parked in the parking lot, walked across the parking lot, went in and stood by the desk, and they said, well, can I help you? I said, yeah, I got kind of like a chest pain here. And so they immediately, you know, they got kind of excited. They practically dragged me in the gal threw it into a wheelchair and kind of dragged the wheelchair and me into the emergency room. And I got on the table and they hooked up the EKG, and that's when I had the heart attack. And they caught it all on the EKG, but I was lucky. If I had gone over to Roy's, I'd probably died there.
And did they give you? As I remember, you're telling the story. There was this shot they gave you.
Streptokinase had just came out, and they were able to give it to me right at the time, and what it did is prevented any damage to the heart muscle. Because they didn't have that before there was, where the blood was cut off from the heart, and when they didn't get blood, the tissue would die in the heart. And so depending on how much tissue died was how much you would be impacted by it. As it turned out, I wasn't impacted very much at all, just because I was so lucky to be there right there when that stuff had been developed. So,
And then they took you to St. Peter's in Olympia.
yeah, they took me to St. Peter's, and I was in the cardiac there, you know.
And I worked in Olympia at the time at
I have a
Washington
funny
Mutual.
sense of humor, you know.
Yes, the nurses were all cracking up. I'm walking down the hall and I hear laughter. You know, and my dad's just had a heart attack. I'm pretty grim. And I hear laughter all the way up into his room, and there's like 4 nurses just giggling in his room. And Dad's being funnier than I've ever seen him be.
Yeah, you know, being funny in the face of death, you know.
I think they call that morbid sense of humor.
Yeah, I guess, you know, the
It's a
one
great
thing
trait.
that I really got, you know, I didn't really feel, after I'd had a shot, I wasn't having that much pain or anything. And I'm in there in the emergency room, and there's on an emergency bed thing, and there's 2 doctors on each side of me, and they're doing their thing, and the director of nurses at the foot of the bed, and they're just working away, and I looked over to the nurse and I said, "What time is lunch?" And that tough broad said, "You may not be here for lunch." I thought that was funny.
You know, when we had that,
But the doctors all just stopped what they were doing when I said that.
when they had that Nisqually earthquake, I was in the barber's chair in Oakville at that private residence, and I'm sitting there and everything is shaking around me and stuff, and so I'm just sitting there watching it because I felt safe. And the gal cutting hair, she runs over to the doorway, and she's standing in the doorway, and she says, Steve, get your ass over here. You know, so I said, okay. So I'm standing behind her. She's got her door there, and I got my hand on her shoulder there, and everything's shaking. I said, I suppose this would be the wrong time to take advantage of you. She goes, you're sick.
So you know where that comes from.
Oh, yeah.
So, Dad, anything else?
You know, and I've tried to do things and always got, well, one lesson. If you've got a good idea on how to make money in a business and you don't have any money and you have to find somebody with money, just remember they're going to wind up with the business and you're going to wind up out.
And you talk about Forest Manor?
And I'm talking about Forest Manor among other things that I've gotten involved.
Yeah, you were the idea guy a few
I was
times.
the idea guy.
Yeah, you were ahead of your time with
I was
computers.
ahead of my time on a couple of things that could have made me, if I'd had the right people with me. But I never had the right people. The one exception, of course, is when I was with Brent Warwick in Emerald. We did really well there.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'd forgotten all about him.
Yeah,
It
and
seemed
that
like
worked
you,
out good. We got screwed, but it wasn't anything that we had any control over. It was just that Medicare instituted a new policy, and most of the small and non-profit home health agencies went out of business.
Well, we got a few $600 checks before that happened
Yeah,
that
we
you
got
gave
some
us.
money on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got a little money out
And
of it.
and each check was that much more than Mom ever thought you'd be able to get. So
Yeah, we came close to, we almost had a sale of it.
Yeah, I
We
know.
turned it down, actually, and looking back on it, we probably should have gone ahead, but we had no way of knowing that what the government was going to do there was going to be so stupid.
yeah.
It's just absolute stupidity.
What's Brent doing now?
And Brent is selling real estate. And he, like everything else he does, he's done fairly well on it.
Is he up in Seattle?
He in the club.
Okay.
I still do his tax return.
Well, so the lesson again on business is get the right people or have your own
Well,
money.
I don't know what to say on that. I didn't have any good luck in ever promoting anything. But in a couple of cases, it was just that my choice was so bad, looking back on it,
Choice
The
of
one down
people?
in Eugene, that could have been a big deal.
Yeah.
But then you never know where it would have led in time anyway.
Right. Things happen for a reason.
Things happen.
so.
We maybe you kids have all done better because we didn't make a lot of money then.
I think we have.
And I do too. I
Yeah.
think maybe it would have worked out better this way.
Well, that's the main thing. Well, hey.
I see problems with my kids where instead of going out and mowing yards for money, they come up and ask Mom for money.
Yeah, it's not just doing it because they live there and it's necessary. It's more of a entitlement thing, and that's the generation we live in now. It's entitlement.
Yeah, so you guys had to work if you wanted anything. We fed you.
Yeah.
We never resented it.
No.
You know, I mean,
Well, it's the way things were. So what
Yeah.
could we resent? We didn't
And
know.
you guys started working early, and you had the good ethics on that. And
we had fun delivering newspapers.
in a lot of ways. Those are different
Same
stories
thing.
for a different time.
Yeah, Rick and I'd get in trouble or not get in trouble.
Not get in trouble
We would
because
we never got caught.
right.
But I just think, if I had a whole bunch of money there, and when you guys were finishing high school, I might have influenced you to go to college someplace or something like that. And God knows what your lives would have been. Might have been done. I mean, well, there was no way of ever knowing.
Well,
No.
I didn't want to
But
go
you
to
guys
college
have
right
all
out of
done-
high school.
Yeah, you guys.
I
have
still
all
don't
done-
want to go to college.
You guys have all done well, and you've done it on your own without.
Yeah.
And all we did was a little support, maybe, and maybe that was the best thing. Maybe if I'd had a lot of money and could have done more for you, it wouldn't have done you any good.
Well, I look at
Might have
kids
done
that were
harm.
given everything when they were in high school and whatever, and they aren't doing as well as we are.
No, they don't.
They don't have the motivation.
Right.
They don't have the motivation, and they don't have the feeling of the necessity of having it yourself.
Well, you guys also taught us the values. I remember in Ontario, in the Cub Scouts, we had those two black kids that came to our. I remember, if I remember, I don't think they were even wearing shoes. They were so poor.
Must have been the only two black kids in Ontario.
They were, and I
They
remember
were.
that they couldn't pay the 25 cents. I think Mom charged, so she just ignored it.
Yeah.
But they showed up a couple times. But
Yeah, I know.
but it was, it was. You guys always taught us there was no difference. So
Well, Dad, thanks for the roughly 3 hours of time, I think. We've
Well,
got
this is enough for posterity.
it is. It's enough,
I left out the worst stuff.
or the best stuff, depending on your perspective.
Turning out of it, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so